I want to just kind of kick off this series, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, and just let you know that here's what I know about many of you. This past week and a half has been a whirlwind for a lot of people. We have more people connected to our church who are sick probably than ever before. And this new variant is very real in the sense of what it's doing, and there's a lot of speculation and doubts and fears. And as a church, we have plans that we're going to be unveiling. I don't have all the details today, but opportunities for people to connect and may or still be not comfortable being in church and all various questions that come with that. But here's what I know. That there's a lot of weight that people are carrying. There's a lot of stress that people are carrying. And so today we're going to jump in and talk about loving our community. And the reality is there's a lot of churches and a lot of Christians who have given up during this season, who have fought this battle, who have felt like in the last year they've been overwhelmed, or year and a half they've been overwhelmed. And today I'm going to bring, I think, a challenging message, maybe a somewhat hard message, but I think something that's going to push you toward reaching your full potential. I had friends of mine texting me this week saying, hey, we saw your county on the national news. What happens at your school board meetings is what they asked me, okay? And the premise is, if you haven't been watching or you've had your head buried in the sand, there's just a lot of stress in there. Right or wrong, not getting involved in the conversation, but there's a lot of stress. And I just want us to lean back into some things and learn some things from the scriptures today. So let me kind of start by painting a picture here. Here's kind of what life has looked like and looks like for so many people. If this board represents the context of your entire life and your ability to sustain in life, you start adding responsibilities and weights to your life. Things like, I get married, so now I have that weight of life. Something you should do if you desire to, and it's not a burden. It's something you want to carry, and something you desire to carry, and something you should carry, and you should take serious. Then I have kids, and that adds another level of weight and responsibility. Things that I have to balance, pies that I have to keep spinning. Of course, then I have, all the different things in life. I want my kids to play sports in life, and I want, to get involved in my kids' PTA at their schools because, all good parents are involved in PTAs. And then I have another kid who needs to do, sports or whatever. And then I have all these doubts and I have all these fears. And then I'm not going to put everything up here because obviously there's a lot of responsibilities that you carry. But you have church life and you have school life and you have relationships that you're trying to balance. And you put all these things on your plate. And so many of us, this is how we came into 2020. This is how we came in. This is how many of you have lived your life forever. You're just constantly balancing, trying to figure out how you're going to live out your full potential with all these things on your plate. And then what happens is something major happens in our life, like COVID. And we don't really know how we're going to handle that because we have never experienced anything quite so heavy. And this is how many of you felt, right? How many of you are like, I don't know. And so it's not just, there's COVID and then there's the loss of a job. There's COVID and then there's actually getting COVID. Then there's somebody in your family being lost to that. Then there's, okay, we're good, we're that. And then all of a sudden you have financial situations or you have stress or then you go back to school and all. This is what people are feeling right now, right? And then somebody just, you realize, man, it's not even a big deal, but somebody just cuts you off on the interstate. Yeah. And then one thing goes wrong and you come home and your kids or your wife or your spouse does something and before you know it, you're like, why am I on edge? Why did that get to me so bad? Why did I just snap? And some of you haven't snapped yet, but you're just before it. But can I tell you something? This is where our community lies right now. This is where your neighbors and your coworkers and your friends and the people we're yelling at over things that matter, but not as much as eternity. Things that we have opinions about, and we look at let's be honest, this is people's life. Abuse is at an all-time high. Spousal abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse. Have you watched or heard of just the murders in our community lately? Have you tuned in to see how many dead bodies are just popping up around here? Can we just be real and say, this is our community? He's like, Carl, I can't believe you say that in church. Well, it's everywhere else. People are living in panic mode. High-speed chases that ended in some of your cities this week from a murder situation that happened in Atlanta. And it's all over us because people are snapping. This is why we said we're going to gather back together as a church, because the mental health crisis is real. And it's not, listen, I understand all of us have different capacities. All of us have different abilities to carry more stuff, but at the end of the day, we're all eventually going to break if we're not careful. And what happens is, so many of us come into stressful situations in our life carrying too many things anyway. Our kids got to do everything. We got to do everything. We got to fill our calendars and we wonder why our marriage struggles and our kids struggle and our spiritual life struggle. And then we wonder why in the world, why is it so hard to be part of our local church? Or why is it so hard to take growth steps? Because we got so much on our plate, and then all of a sudden here comes something big. But hear me, as your pastor, we can't stop and we won't stop loving those who need Jesus no matter what it takes. We have a saying in our church, we will do, if you're going to do it right. Like 3 of y'all, we're going to change the world. We have a saying that we say, we will do everything short of sin to reach those far from God because God did everything short of sin to reach us. Here's the problem that we're facing. So many people don't feel like they're far from God, but they are. And their world is falling apart. And the problem is, hear me, some of you stopped caring. Can I be honest with you? 2020 was not, and even 2021, was not everything I had hoped it would be in 2019. Right? Like the last 18 months has been a whirlwind. And there's fears and everything. All the fears you experienced in the spring and in the last fall, or some of you are experiencing again, and you're like, oh my God, here we go again. Can I handle it again? The reality is, just an honest pastor moment, this was not the way it looked in my mind 2 years ago. So in January of 2020, we grew by 600 people in 8 weeks, 9 weeks. 600 people. Do you remember the passion and the energy? You remember the night of worship for some of you in 2020 in January? I mean, it was like fire, y'all. If you've never been to a night of worship, you need to be here. I remember the energy, the passion, the people going after God, and then 2020, March 2020, COVID, everything shut, and everybody panics. People begin to crack. People held up for so long, and now we're seeing and you think, listen, Henry, it's just beginning. So I want to take you back to a passage that, when I say we can't stop and we won't stop, I want to take you back to an Old Testament passage. I'll give you a little history here. The children of Israel had been in captivity. They had lost their homeland. They had been in slavery in Egypt. They had lost their homeland, what we know as the Promised Land. The children of God had lost the nation of Israel and Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, and God had promised that He was going to give it back to them. The problem is He rescues them out of slavery. He sends them across the Red Sea. He parts the sea, and they get to the other side, and then they spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness. Why? Because they're complaining, they're mad, they're frustrated, and they're blaming God. And here, a whole generation passes and doesn't enter the Promised Land because of their attitude and their mentality. Then Joshua, Moses dies, Joshua comes to lead the children of Israel. And now he's on his way back into the Promised Land, and they come to the very first part of the Promised Land that God's going to give them, a city called Jericho. Jericho is a fortified city. There are walls on all sides. It cannot be penetrated by outside forces. But God says He's going to give them the Promised Land back. And Joshua gets a word from God, and he tells his people a little bit of the plan, okay? They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know all the details. But He gives them this plan that God gives him in Joshua chapter number 6. We're going to read it together on the screen. It says, now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. That's important, because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands along with its king and its fighting men. Now let's pause for a second. The walls are fortified. The city is safe, and Joshua gets a word from God. See, I've given it to you. Then He tells him, march around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Then have 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the whole army. Have trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priest. When you hear them sound a long blast of the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the cities will collapse and the army will go up and go straight in. Now hear me. These are walls. He says, you want to take the walls down? Then you just got to march. Now let's pause for a second. This is important because too many people hear something like this. If you're in the crowd and your leader said, now listen, all I want you to do is get up, we're going to march, and then we're going to go to bed. You know how long it takes to march around Jericho? About an hour. About an hour. Now, we'll come back to this. And he says, we're just going to march one time on day one. You're not going to talk. You're going to be quiet. You're just going to do it. Now, imagine if I came up here and gave instructions like that on Sunday morning, how that would go over real well with y'all. Just shut up and march is what he says. He doesn't tell all the people everything, and he has to believe God for this crazy thing after they've been roaming in the wilderness for 40 years. And people, listen, people are going to do it. The children of Israel are going to listen, and they're actually going to do it. But why is it in our life? Why is it that we stop? Why is it that we quit when God tells us to do something and things get hard? Why is it that we quit? So as we talk about this idea of can't stop, won't stop, here's what I need you to hear. When we stop doing what God's called us to do, not only do we miss out on the promises of God in our own life, but it also has effects on the people around us. And so as a church, 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago, since that time, we have seen 3,000 people come to know Christ and 1,500 people take their next step of baptism. That's only God can do that. But the reason we saw it is because the obedience of the people who call Relevant Church their home. But why is it that some of you have felt like quitting? Why is it that some of you who used to be so heavily involved, you're sitting on the sidelines now? Why is it that you just kind of stopped and you're just kind of coasting through life? Do you remember the moment when you came to know Christ in your life and you were so passionate and you were willing to do anything? I mean, you would have done anything for God. You wanted everybody to know, and now you're just kind of going through the motions? What happened? Can I tell you, probably life happened. Probably we got too much on our plate and we got tired of marching. But why is it that we quit? Here, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why this happens to us. Then we're going to try to draw a parallel from what's happening in our community and what's happening in the church in America. Here we go. 3 reasons why people stop marching. Here it is. The first one is we only see the negatives. We only see the negatives. Now, I'm going to tell you this quick story. There was a man who worked at a lumber yard. And at the lumber yard, every day when they would leave, they had to go through security. The security would make sure that, they check their bags, all that kind of stuff, just quality control. And so this man, one day, he's pushing a wheelbarrow out to his car. He has to go through the security gate, and they see in the wheelbarrow, there's a box. And the security guy says, "Hey, what is in your box?" He says, "Well, it's just sawdust from cutting." He said, "They don't need it, and I'm taking it home and putting a playground in." He says, Well, I got to see it because I got to make sure you're not stealing anything. And so he opens the box, shows him the sawdust. There's nothing in it. He says, "Okay, sir, you go ahead." Next day, comes back, same sort of thing. Has a box in a wheelbarrow. He's pushing it to his car. He says, "What's in the box?" "I got to check the box. It's just sawdust. We're building a playground. We're putting it on the turf around it." And he says, "Okay," so he checks it. Day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. Same thing. He pushes the wheelbarrow up, comes up, different box. He says, "I got to look in the box." Nothing but sawdust in the box. Day 6, he pushes the wheelbarrow up, and the guy says, "Hey, I got to look in your box." He said, "I got to be honest with you, though. Some tells me you're stealing something." And he says, "Just between me and you, I won't tell anybody. Are you stealing something? And if so, what are you stealing?" He said, "I'm stealing wheelbarrows." Sometimes we're so busy looking at the wrong things, we forgot about the God who got us to where we are. And there's so many of us looking at the sawdust and missing out on the fact that God still holds the whole world in his hands. And that we used to be far from God and he set us free. And we had this passion, we had this excitement for God. And all of a sudden, somewhere along the way, because life happened to us and we got on social media too much, come on, all we saw was negative and all we could focus on was negative. And now we're not where we want to be with God. We're just kind of drifting. The children of Israel have been delivered out of slavery, crossed the Red Sea, and now God still has plans to deliver them to the promised land, their homeland. And the only thing that will keep them from doing it or taking back their homeland is if they're disobedient, if they stop. A previous generation has already passed because of their disobedience, because of their apathy, and because of their negativity. This mirrors our salvation a lot, doesn't it? We craved it. We saw God do great things in our life, and now we're just going through the motions. And here's what I need you to understand. We can compare ourselves to others, and look, we talked about that last week, but you can see all these other people and look how God they're doing, and you're looking at your own life, and you're realizing, man, I'm not doing so well. Here's what I need you to hear. We often see other people's victory, but we fail to see their faithfulness through the process. It says in chapter 1, Now, the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. In other words, they were fortified. It was one of the most fortified cities of that day. You can't get in. You can't get out. You can't penetrate these walls. No one went in and no one came out. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see? See? What do you mean see? I see walls. That's what I see. I see something impossible. He says, see, I've delivered into your hands along with the king and all of its fighting men. I've delivered Jericho. What? I don't see it, God. I don't see this is what I see. I see stress and anxiety and fatigue. I'm tired. We've been roaming in the wilderness for 40 years. God, I see walls. And he says, you just go march. But inside the walls, it says the walls are fortified not because the people on the inside weren't feeling good about themselves. They were fearful. They were anxious. They had doubt. Chaos was ensuing. Why was it ensuing? Because they had heard about the God of the Israelites who had delivered them through the Red Sea on dry ground, who had been with them, and they were fearful of this God because they had stood against this God. So the walls were to keep the Israelites out, but also on the inside of the city was a young woman named Rahab, who was a prostitute. She was searching for something. And in this story, you would see later, I don't have time to go into it, but when the walls come, God does something tremendous in Rahab's life. But Rahab is significant of our community, trying to fulfill everything with sexuality and greed and hunger and pursuit of something. And all it leads to is brokenness. And so, all God's people can see are the walls, the obstacles. And Joshua says, we just go march. Now, these are soldiers, y'all. These are people ready for battle. Now, and not all of them are soldiers. Some of them are just people. Just there, just run. But some of these I want you to imagine how the message would go if I just said, guys, I don't know how. We just go, tomorrow we're going to show up, we're just going to march. We're not going to talk, we just going to march. Just shut up and march. But what I have learned and what you're going to see in the story is what you see in life does not always look like what God has promised. In other words, sometimes God speaks of things as if they've already happened because he's already planned for it, but you haven't seen it or haven't seen it because we haven't been obedient or faithful through the process long enough. Because see, I've already delivered these walls. All it takes is your obedience. So start marching. Start marching. We only see the negatives, though, so let's pause for a second. You imagine being a soldier, and you go and you start marching. You got your sword, you're ready to go to battle, and he marched for it. You know how long it take to go around Jericho? About an hour. So after an hour, you're done. You get to go home. Imagine that conversation. What'd you do today? Well, honey, we just marched. So you mean you didn't go into battle? Well, you sure are home early. Well, I know, we just walked around the city. So you didn't use your sword, you didn't go into, no, we just walked. All right, that sounds good. Next day, guess what they do? Get up and march. About an hour, time to go home. Did you just march again? Guys, come on, this is getting pretty, I just walked around the city once, came home. Like, this is not what a soldier does. You can imagine the conversations. You can imagine wow, what are you really working, right? Are you really doing anything? And it's so easy. Can you imagine how hard it would be after day 2, after day 3, after day 4? We're getting in this, and all we begin to see is like, what are we doing in this situation? Well, all we can begin to see is the negatives. Nothing happened today. Nothing happened today. Here's the second reason. We get tired of the mundane. We quit marching because we get tired of the mundane, and we see a community that's lost and dying and headed for eternity, and we want to change it in a week. We want to change it in a month. We want our neighbors to come to know Christ now. We want to give a few dollars and see God's blessings. We want to serve a few weeks and see God change the world. And God says, no. There's some mundane things that are hard. Let's be honest. How hard is it to make time to read your Bible? Some of y'all are like, what is a Bible? Like, you see what I mean? Like, how hard is it to share your faith on an ongoing basis, not get caught up in the world around, serving, loving my neighbor, tithing, doing hard things? Listen, I told you earlier this year, I told you several times, I felt like God challenged us to do hard things this year as a staff, specifically me as a leader. But some of you and some of us, the hardest thing you'll ever do is be consistent. I'm going to say it a little louder for the people in the back, is sometimes the hardest thing in life that you'll ever do is be consistent, be faithful. Be faithful to your wife. Show up every day and love her the way God loved the church. Be faithful to your husband. Show up every day and love him the way you're supposed to love him. Be faithful to your kids even when they're crazy. Be faithful to your church. Be faithful in your generosity. Be faithful to your neighbor. Love your neighbor even when things are going on. And here's the problem. Sometimes we get sick and tired of just being faithful, don't we?
Amen.
And then it says this in verse 6. So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests together. It says, take up the Ark of the Covenant, the Lord has seen, and have the 7 priests carry the trumpets in front of it. Now, the Ark of the Covenant represented the presence of God. In the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant represented the presence of God. They didn't want to do anything without the presence of God. And he said, and he ordered the army, advance, march around the city with an armed guard, and go ahead of the Ark of the Lord. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the Ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and their rear. And the rear guard followed the ark. All this time, the trumpets were sounded. Can y'all imagine? An hour of just trumpets. But Joshua had command of the army. Do not give a war cry. Do not raise your voices. Do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout. Okay, here's what I know. If we were to say, everybody, we're going to sing together in unison. There's some of y'all who can't sing, right? Now, I don't know if you've ever heard a trumpet. Where did my trumpet go? It was out here. I don't know how many of you ever heard a trumpet, but can you imagine? Anybody, any trumpet players in the house? Yeah, some of y'all like 2 of y'all. All right. Some of these people can blow this. Now, that's not what a trumpet would have looked like back then. It was more of a horn. But can you imagine an hour? People who've never blown the horn the right way. People who are just like, oh, I mean, can you imagine 45 minutes into blowing a horn? An hour. Now go home. Come back and do it again tomorrow. And shut up. I won't do it again. You'd imagine. I mean, I'm sure it was a beautiful sound. In my mind, it was torture. If I had to walk around the city for an hour with all of y'all blowing a horn, I'd be like, oh, dear God. And here's the problem. So they're walking around, and in our modern day culture, we couldn't even do this, could we? Because some of y'all be like, oh my gosh, I gotta put this on my story. I'm not talking, I'm just putting it on my story. And then others of y'all be like, look how good I am at playing the horn. Delete, do it again. Do you see how stupid we are sometimes? I'm not saying because you take selfies you're stupid. I'm just saying in America, we're just so all over the place, aren't we? These people got to show up and march and listen to horns and just march. That's it. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once, it says. Then the army returned to the camp and spent the night there. What an eventful day. You ever show up on Sundays, those of you who serve, and be like, man, I'm tired. There's times I preach on Sundays, I'm like, that was amazing. And other times I'm like, what am I doing? And Joshua got up the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, the presence of God. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord, blowing the trumpets. Then the armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the covenant while the trumpets kept sounding. Still more trumpets. So on the second day, after they marched around the city once and returned to the camp, they did this for 6 days, y'all. 6 days. No winds, no signs of victory, no talking, just horns. This is a blast. But do you want what God's promised, or do you want to just let your city lay in ruins? The modern day church would have a lot. See, some pastor would have to get online and do his daily recap of what happened. Tell you my thoughts on everything. I'm like, just go love your neighbor. We need everybody's thoughts on everything. Somebody's going to march and get mad because somebody isn't marching right. Or this guy always wants to be in the front. He should be in the back. Y'all hear it? I want to be rewarded for my marching. Hey, look at me, I'm marching. I mean, Joshua, look, I'm doing what you said, Joshua. God forbid the person who gets lost in the crowd and doesn't get the recognition, or if they lose internet reception because they can't post what they're doing for Jesus on social media. And some people are going to get so frustrated, let's be honest, they're just going to go look for another army because it's easier to march in that army. Too far? There are plenty of armies out there. If y'all don't want to go hard, go home. Come on, brother. This is why some of y'all on 14 days of prayer and fasting, you'll go into your prayer closet daily and you'll seek God and you'll challenge yourself, and others of y'all like, man, I'm going to give up Instagram. Because giving up food's too hard. I promise you that what Jesus was doing in the desert, giving up Instagram for us. 40 days of prayer and fasting for your soul and for mine before he's going to go to a cross for your sins and mine. And some of us are like, I don't know if I can do this. We ain't stopping, y'all. Whoever's going to march, we're going to march until we see the gates of hell come crashing down in our community. We got a quitting culture, and now that quitting culture is seeping into the church, and I refuse to quit without fighting with you. And I refuse to let you quit without fighting for you. And we're going to change this city. We're going to change this county. We're going to see South Atlanta change if I have anything to do with it. And sometimes it's going to be boring and mundane, and it's going to feel stupid. It's going to be hot. It's going to be sweaty. And somebody's going to make us mad, but we're going to keep on marching. Here's the problem, though. Sometimes the process is longer than we thought. 6 days. Joshua, stop smoking whatever you're smoking, because this march is getting old. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak. These people don't even know what's coming. They just go home and like, what are we doing tomorrow? They get up and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except on that day, they circled it 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priests sounded the horns and the trumpet, Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. What? You told us to shut up for 7 days. And now we're mad at each other. I mean, how do you do that? And now when you say shout, we just going to shout and then it's going to happen? The walls are still there, Joshua. This man's crazy. But when you've heard from God, you've heard from God. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted. And at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. Sometimes you got to raise your voice and you got to shout when you don't feel like shouting. You got to sing when you don't feel like singing. You got to march even when you ain't winning. This is the wall collapsed, so everyone charged straight in, and they took the city, and they gave the promises of God became fulfilled. The walls came crashing down, and there was a young lady, a harlot. She was named Rahab. She would ultimately be in the bloodline of Jesus. She was the first Gentile to really put her trust in her faith. She wasn't a Jew. She wasn't even one of God's chosen people, but she ultimately found a faith somehow in this God of Israel. And she was restored. And if I can be honest with you, honest pastor moment. 2010, we started Relevant Church with 5 people that moved here in 2009 and then grew to about 60, 70 before we opened the doors, and then God has blessed us substantially. We had people, some of y'all remember, we set up and tore down 6 hours every single weekend to make a place, not so we could have a cool place to do church, because we knew people far from God needed a place, and they were going to walk in there and it was going to be there one day, and they were going to sit in a seat that somebody sat up, and that you had a place in the kingdom of God. You had rewards in heaven because you sat up a seat that somebody sat in and came to know Christ because they had somewhere to sit on a Sunday. And so that's how we got here. But somewhere, life got hard and some of y'all quit. So 2019, we went on a staff development. We'd never done staff development in 9 years. And so I felt God really lay on my heart, take the staff away and let's spend some time dreaming together. This was November 2019. 2019, we came up with a 3-year plan, and for some reason, we knew that this crisis of brokenness was getting worse in our community. You've heard us talk about for the love of the lonely, overwhelmed, vulnerable, and empty. for the Love Initiative. And so we said one of the biggest things we're going to be focusing on is develop a wholeness and wellness center. In 3 years, our goal is to establish a wholeness and wellness center because we feel like the crisis, and this means like physical wellness, spiritual wellness, mind, body, soul, that whole conversation. That's why you see things on this Life at Relevant that you're beginning to see where it says physical wellness, because we want, listen, if you're not physically well, it's hard to be fully mentally well. If you're not mentally well, it's hard to be spiritually well. If you're not spiritually well, it's hard to do anything well. And so you're seeing the beginning stages of us continuing that conversation about a wellness center. But little did we know, 3.5 months later, all hell would break loose. From January to March, we grew by 600 people. We had 4 services. We were turning people away in the old auditorium. We had 250 plus people attending our 1 o'clock p.m. service. Diversity in our church was growing. We were about 25% of our congregation was black brothers and sisters who call this church their home. We were beginning to look like our community. Then COVID hits. Then racism goes crazy in our community. The awareness of those things and all the things that we went through in 20, it was crazy. And it was probably the toughest leadership year of my life. We were looking forward to new volunteers, more excitement. We got this building that's opening up. We're expecting 3,000 people and looking at campuses beyond here. And we opened the building in September with 900 people. That is not what we dreamed of. We're going to keep marching. The walls look high. The city seems fortified. And all hell broke loose. But can I tell you, we just met with our elders about a week and a half ago, and we're in a very strong, very healthy place. But where we're weak is there's some of you who feel like quitting because you got too many things, and you're just looking at life, and you're going, how am I going to do this? I'm just too old. And so where we're not missing it financially. We're not missing it in our culture. We're not missing it in opportunities for us to grow. Where we're missing it, hear me, is your passion, our passion for God and our passion for our community. And we're not stopping. And you know why we're missing it? Because a lot of times we just get a lack of focus because of all the chaos around us. And so, we're going to keep marching. The stats are overwhelming of how many people we're seeing. Some of you are taking steps for counseling. I had somebody else ask me about counseling. How do we get involved in counseling just between services? That so many of you are finding wholeness and healing in your life. The amount of salvations and baptisms. We got baptisms coming up in a couple weeks. We're going to celebrate with people taking their next steps of baptism. The good life. This one's full. We got another one starting in a few weeks that's almost full. It may be full now. I don't know. People taking next steps toward wholeness and healing in their life. It's what we saw in November of 2019 that God was preparing us for. And now, because of your generosity, we've been able to start the counseling center. And I'm going to show you a video here in a moment that's going to show you how much we're making a difference in the next generation's life, because you want to know who's suffering? The next generation. And we're not marching because we know when the end is in sight. We're marching just because He told us to. Just because God said, march till I tell you otherwise. I've already given you the city. The only thing keeping you from actually tangibly having it is your obedience. And so, I want to show you a video here in a minute. For some of you, you're going to recognize this kid. He's not a kid anymore. Been with us for close to 8, 9, 10 years now. And the reason I show you this is because I'm going to show you 3 different videos of young people over the next 3 weeks, young adults in our church. We say at Relevant Church, we want a generation to grow up, never know a day without knowing Jesus. And we're seeing some of that in so many of our young adults and teenagers' lives. But it's really, parents, it's up to you to make sure that you're making God and church and all those things a priority for your kids. But the other thing is when you see this video, many of you had an impact on this young man's life and the ones we're going to show in the weeks and months to come, either in kids ministry or student ministry. And I don't show you this because of, just for fun. I show you this because I want you to see that, we have a generation of kids, they don't even realize how bad it is. They don't realize the brokenness they're facing. And I want to show you this because I think it'll be an encouragement to you that what we do matters. What we've done has mattered. And that's the reason we're not going to stop, because there are thousands of kids and marriages and adults and seniors that still are dealing with junk. And what you do, how you serve, how you give, what time and energy and effort you put into it matters tremendously. Take a look.
My name is Bailey Perkins, and I am 20 years old. I am a Christ follower and grew up at Relevant Church. I was born with a disability called hard of hearing. I grew up wearing hearing aids, and I also struggled with speech. I have a speech impairment where I don't pronounce everything correctly. It kind of goes with me not hearing well either. I knew I was different from the people around me and that I had to learn how to live with what I have. It was going well until I got into middle school. That's when people changed. I got bullied a lot in my middle school years and didn't do anything about it. I just felt weak and just let the bully keep doing whatever they were doing, whether it was mocking me, calling me names, hitting me, whatever you could think of. I feel like I couldn't speak up for myself. It was really hard for me, to be honest. I felt alone. I would ask God all the time, why me? Why do I have to go through that? And I knew I shouldn't question, but there was times where I just want answers. The bullying continued until I became a sophomore in high school. It was a hard season for me, but I had to remind myself that God made me the way I am, and I'm different for a reason. Relevance Church and God has helped me through it all. It took me a long time to learn that my voice matters and that I do need to speak up for myself. I can't just keep letting people walk over me all the time. The older I get, the harder it will get. So I started serving in 6th grade at Relevant Church. I got saved in 8th grade and I was baptized on Mother's Day. That was the best thing that ever happened to me. When I first started serving, I was shy and awkward. I served in elementary. I started off as a helper in small group. So then I had a leader that wanted me to be a motion leader for the kid when I was in 8th grade, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was shy and awkward, so I could never imagine being on stage. But I am thankful that I said yes because I had to get out of my shell and do uncomfortable things. It ended up being great for me now that I lead motion leader. It built up my confidence to get on stage even with the disability I have. I had to learn how to embrace it and accept what I have. Everything was going so great. I had an amazing group of friends at my church, play sport, enjoy being at church, many other things. Until last year, I lost almost all of my good hearing. It started back in January of 2020. I lost my hearing. I lost my hearing throughout my life, and they always come back. But my hearing doctor told me that one day it may not come back. Well, that January of 2020, that's when it didn't come back. So I realized after a couple weeks, it wasn't coming back. So that's why I went for a hearing doctor. He told me that my hearing went down and it's not coming back. It was a devastating news. I had to start all over how to hear again. So I got a new hearing aid where it's more powerful and it will help. So in March of 2020, right before COVID hit, I got my new hearing aid, and they do help, but it's never gonna be the same way I used to hear. So even though it was sad and all, I'm so grateful for everything I have, and I just had to do a step and learn the way I live now, or I'm just gonna be miserable all the time if I just chose to live by being sad about it. So after I got it, I could hear better, but it's not the same way I used to hear before I lost it. That was really my only choice at the moment. So I had to learn that this is how it's going to be for me. So fast forward a couple months later, I started an internship program called Renown, which is here at Relevant Church, and I have grown so much from it. It made me grow spiritually stronger and made me more confident about myself, even with the disability I have. I had many amazing opportunities that I received even when it was way out of my comfort zone, but I knew I could do it. I have hosted middle high schoolers, lead student leaders, and talk in front of a big crowd. That's a lot for me. During the internship, I decided to not let the disability I have take me away from pursuing the opportunity God wanted me to do. I felt so much closer to God and started to listen to Him more than what others said. I knew He wanted me to do this, and it's just me trying to prove that anybody could do anything that they could set their mind to. People didn't believe I could do half the things I'm doing right now just because of the disability I have. So I proved that I am more than just a disability, and I could do what others do. This past January, I joined a relevant college where it partners with Evangel University. That was another great thing I got to do because they understood me and what I have and helped me throughout the semester. I just want to say that I stopped letting people take away from me and tell me things I could not do. They are always going to say something no matter what, so just do it anyway. That's my best advice for people. It's okay to be uncomfortable or unsure if you should do it or not, but once you do it, you will be glad you did. That's how you grow, and that's how I grew.
So proud of that kid, man. And he's close to our family. He's had an impact on my kids. Because that's the way it should work in the church, is that we pour into kids and then they pour into the next generation and they pour into the next generation. And you know with this, some of you guys carry that story because you remember when Bailey was in kids ministry. And then he's in student ministry, and now he's a student leader, and now he's part-time staff at Relevant Church. You remember being in that small group with him, and you remember having conversations with him. Or whatever kid it is that I'm telling you this because what you do matters. And what you don't do matters. And so many people have been marching, and some just sitting down having a picnic telling me, well, when the walls fall, then I'll get up. That ain't how it works in the kingdom. As a follower of Jesus, we're called to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him. And I know sometimes it gets tiring and mundane, and you wonder and you're fatigued. And here's my question. Will you keep walking when it's not working like you thought? Will you keep marching when the walls haven't fallen yet? Because there's two battles that are simultaneously happening today. One is the battle for the people in our community who are far from God. They're far from God. Or for some of you who are just, this is your life. That's one battle that we can't stop and we won't stop fighting for. Then there's a second battle. And the second battle is in some of you who you've quit. And I love you enough as your pastor not to say, it's all right, just get back in the game one sometime. Get in the game and play hard until this life is over. You do what God's called you to do. Don't look back. Don't wait on the next crisis and fall apart. So we're going to go after the people in our community. But then there's some of you, there's the battle for community and there's the battle for your soul. Because what happens is, some of you look at, if this rope represents your life right here, this little red part represents your life on earth, then this white part represents eternity. You get the point? Why is it that we spend so much time focusing on this and so little focusing on this? I'm tired. My kids got this. We try our best to enjoy. It's only got one. FOMO, YOLO. You're right. You only live once and then eternity. That's right. And you know what we end up doing? We're 14 and we're like, oh God, staying pure till I'm 20 and married, or 22 or 37 or whatever. See, you want me to stay pure physically and sexually? That's a long time, God. You see why it ain't your truth, it's God's truth? You see why you don't get to do what feels good? Because there's eternity waiting. And some of us, we got so busy and we got so overwhelmed in life. God, we just gonna take a break. We just not gonna. We just want to enjoy some vacation time. I'm not saying we don't need to rest. I'm not saying that at all. We need to rest. But listen, there's a point when this life ends and eternity begins, and what you did with this life matters, or what you didn't do with this life matters. And there's some of you, listen, I know the temptation. You live your whole life here. I got to save for retirement so I can enjoy this much of it. And God says, If that's how you want to live. But eternity matters. I know most of us make decisions on this is I'm right here in my life, and this is what I feel right now, so this is what I'm going to do. And we lose sight of the fact that there's eternity for us, but there's also eternity. These people only got one life too, and then eternity begins for them. You say, well, Carl, how long we got to walk? How long we got to walk? I don't know, but the mundane stuff gets hard, right? You ever, think about it. If you're working out, don't you wish you could see progress while you're working out? While you're dieting, you could see, eat a piece of broccoli, grow an ab. We'd be like, give me some more. But you don't. I can't go do 150 pull-ups yesterday and all of a sudden come in and look swole today. That's not going to happen. It's a process. You say, well, how long does the process take? I don't know. Any NASCAR fans in the house? There's got to be some NASCAR fans in the house. Butts County ain't too far from here. Come on. I don't watch NASCAR, but you know what I do like about NASCAR? Is at the bottom of the screen, all you do is this. Somebody making a lot of money. All this. But you know what I love when you watch it on the screen? There's a lap counter. You get a countdown to the last lap, and the last lap, they wave a flag so everybody knows it's the last lap. And some of you are like, well, when is the flag gonna wave? I don't know, but listen to me. If you walk every lap like it's your last, one day you'll be right. Some of it quit. But I can't stop and I won't stop. And I know there's a group of people who say, I can't stop and I won't stop. And I'm praying for those of you who feel like quitting or you've already quit. Listen, we're going to see God change this city. And we're going to lead the march. And I want you with us. And when we stand before God and we get to start eternity, I want us to look at each other in eternity and go, hey, you did good. I did good. We did it together. We changed the world. We didn't worry about what this moment had to offer. We see all these people in our community because the walls came down and then people rose up out of their darkness and out of their brokenness, and we changed the city and we made a difference, and we may even change the world. But it's because of your faithfulness. Not just me. It's us. We got to do this together. If you're with me, why don't you stand to your feet and put your hands together and say, we're going to shout for this city. We're going to shout for this community. We're not going to back down. We're not going to quit. Now we got to do it, right? Even when it don't feel like it's going to work. Even when we make mistakes. And we got more things we'll tell you about here in a minute, but I want you to close your eyes. We're going to sing this song. And I want this song, you may not know the words of it, but I want it to become a war cry. I want you to sing this song from the bottom of your heart, and I want you to just realize that God is the God who breathes miracles. Maybe you're going through a difficult season. You're lost. You're far from God. I'm going to give you a chance to respond in a moment. But right now, as we sing this song together, I want you to just focus your attention on the God who holds the whole world in his hands, who's never lost a battle. Come on, sing this with us.
For the
there's a couple things I want to say to you before you leave, but before we do, I want you to close your eyes. Maybe you're here, you're not a follower of Jesus, your world is falling apart, you realize you can't make it on your own. Jesus is the only one who can put your pieces back together. You're far from God. You may have said a prayer, you may have been in church, you may have done some things, but you're not living for God today. You want to ask Jesus to be Lord of your life, forgive you of your sins, and you want to begin to live for Him along with the people in this church to partner with you to help you reach your full potential in Jesus with nobody looking around. When I say 3, I'm not going to call you out and embarrass you. Would you lift your hands right where you're at, or maybe even online? Let us know by sending us a message. Come on, 1, 2, 3. Right now, all across this room, I see hands. Yep, going up. Yep. Come on. Yeah. This is what it's all about. It's the beginning, church. Just the beginning. If you lifted your hand, would you whisper these words to God? Dear God, I come to you right now and I thank you for sending Jesus to live a sinless life, to take my sins upon His back, to die on a cross and be resurrected so that I could have new life. I put my trust in you. I put my faith in you. I ask that you would save me, forgive me my sins, be Lord of my life. Today I confess you as my Savior, and I confess you as my Lord. Thank you for saving me. In Jesus' name. Now, all across this room, you need to make the most of this life that you've been given. You've quit. You've thought about quitting. You're weary. You're tired. Come on, right now, commit yourself to God. All across this room, God, I pray for my brothers and sisters to take steps. Some need to get back involved in serving. Some need to be generous again. Some need to quit. Stop forgetting what you've done for them and remember how good you've been. And God, help us to all engage in this community to change this world. We love you. We thank you for your generosity towards us. Now, God, give us the courage and the strength to keep on marching. In Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. No less than 10 people just received Jesus into their life. Come on, church. Yeah.